this very special session. For an institute for functional intelligent materials to have a seminar about wellness and mental health is something not very common. Okay? But of course, all of us, at some point in our lives, we struggle with issues due to the pressures we have in our life, professional life, personal life, family life, and so on. So I think it's very important, actually, for us to hear about how to deal with those issues so we can deal with them and have a healthy mental life, right? So the speaker today is a very special for me in particular, because for a long time, Oberdan here was actually my therapist. Okay, so we worked together for many years, and he had a huge impact in my life and helped me actually to achieve things that I never thought I would be able to achieve. Okay, so he's a very, very special person and of the highest intellectual levels. And after we finished, a few years later, we reconnected as friends. Okay, so he was my therapist and then we became friends. A very unusual type of relationship. And I'm very grateful to him for everything he did for me personally on the issues I had to deal with. Okay, so today I invited him to come here so he could talk to you about things which are really important and all of us should be aware of, but sometimes we are not. Okay, so with that, I want to let my friend here take care of you.
Thank you, Antonio. Thank you very much. It's a real honor to be here, and I want to also honor your courage to openly share the introduction that you have. Thank you very much. That touches me. Good afternoon, everybody. Today we're going to spend about an hour together to go through some concepts and ideas, and then we'll have plenty of time for a Q&A throughout and during the end of the seminar. I'll start with a quick introduction and then I'll signpost the rest of the talk so that we know where we stand. So my name is Dr. Oberdan Marianetti. I'm a trained psychologist and I have a doctorate in clinical sexology. I've had a fairly eclectic life. I started life in the military in Italy. I was an officer in the paratroopers brigade of the Italian army, and that led me to eventually a whole different career path that landed me in corporate. After training as a psychologist, I worked as an in-house psychologist for large MNCs, where I worked on a various range of matters around leadership, management, culture change, organizational change. And I was one of the first authors in the world to write academically about mindfulness in the workplace, long before mindfulness was being spoken about as it is today. And I am pleased to have a book, a chapter in a textbook by Oxford University and some writings with the British Psychological Society. I'm a public speaker also, and I do a lot of events around leadership, mindfulness, mental health, and well-being. And if you are familiar with the Wim Hof method and the Oxygen Advantage method, over the last few years, I've also qualified as an instructor for both of those. And today I work mixing all of the experiences that life brought me with these disciplines and engagements as a psychotherapist. That's my bread and butter. I spend most of my week in the clinic working with individual and clients who are wanting to figure out a healthier, more balanced way of living. I am also the founder of a company called Wellness, where we have formally married physical experiences like movement, breath work, and exposure to extreme cold temperatures with the psychology that I bring from my therapeutic experience. Now, before we begin, I'd like to make this an interactive session. Can I ask you to all get your telephones out and scan the QR code? If you cannot scan the QR code, visit slido.com, and to access the event, you will need to just type in the code Love Life. One word, no spaces, all small letters. I'll give the chance to everyone to scan and access the system. In the meantime, I'll tell you a little bit about what it is. It's an interactive tool to both respond to polling questions as well as for Q&A. I appreciate that settings like this can be a little bit tense in terms of asking questions publicly. So if you do have questions and you feel a little shy, you can put them on the board and you will be able to do so on a screen that looks like this. You can type it at any time. It's completely anonymous. You're not asked to log in or anything, and they will appear on the board. I'll show you later what it looks like. Once questions begin to pop in, you will notice there's a like button next to it. I highlight this because the questions with the most votes, they go to the top of the Q&A list. And so as well as taking questions from the room, I will also be taking the questions in the order by which they were voted. I want to start with a poll just now, if you don't mind, Marilyn, to move to the Slido. Just 3 quick questions which you should see appearing on your screen. What one word would you choose to describe your life today? Why don't you just shout a few of those? What one word would you choose to describe your life today? Okay, keep going. Oh, here we go. I'm connected now. Right, so you can type it. 2 participants, 6 participants. Great, keep typing. Let's see what we get. Fun, uncertainty, unwell, rushed, exciting, stressful. Mostly I can see on the negative side. Exciting is clearly a good one. Nervous, hectic, monotonous, challenging, depressed. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. Fun, great for you. Repetitive, yeah, I can understand that. Sleepy, I get that. Struggling, chaotic, tired, stressful. Okay, stressful and tired are clearly winning it. Okay, I think we get the theme, right? That the series is tending towards the negative aspect of the spectrum. Okay, thank you for this. Let me activate the second question now, which you should see coming up on the screen anytime now. Which of these statements best describe you today? I feel overwhelmed by life demands. I manage my life demands appropriately. There is too little stimulation to feel inspired by life. Which best describe your life today? Once again, it looks like the tendency is towards the negative, even though it's quite neck and neck with a balanced life. Okay, this is good to see. 55 votes, 56. Okay, we'll leave it at that. And the third and final poll that I would like to ask of you is, if you could please rank which of the following you pay most attention to in order for you to stay healthy. Do you mostly listen to your thoughts, your emotions, your physical sensations, or feedback from others? What do you most pay attention to in order to make decisions around your health and keeping it balanced? And once you select the ranking, we should give them a scoring. And here we go. We then begin to get the actual results. So we had 56 voters earlier. We'll wait to get a list of 40, and at least we get a representative sample of those who are participating in this. But I have to say, thus far, not surprising really that thoughts are winning it. Oh, even though emotions is inching out slowly. 48. Okay, this is interesting. I am positively surprised to see that emotions are actually ranking second. You see, we live in a society across cultures that most certainly emphasizes the physical body and the intellectual body as our prime port of call to make decisions and be successful in life. Seldom do we pay attention to emotions, but this is very encouraging to see. Okay, thank you for that. So once the Q&A begins, you should then go back and see this kind of screen. This is the Q&A, is not the poll. So begin to put your questions here. And once you have a question that you like, remember you can vote it, and then I will use it. All is possible. So let's figure out, how do you deal with it when Costa one day calls you to his office and says, "You're fired"? Let's see if we can use some of the tools I share with you today. Marilyn, could you kindly move back to the PowerPoint slides? We begin the presentation from here. That was hilarious. Well done. Thanks for sharing that. All right, great. So let's begin with the content of the presentation. So as I mentioned, we're going to have an hour together. We're going to cover topics around balance, why we lose balance in life, what happens to us when we lose it, and how we can recreate it. Now, there are a million angles from which we can tackle this topic. The one that I would clearly be focusing on is the psychological aspect in view of a healthy and balanced life. And plenty of Q&A time, so we should be able to cover a lot of what I share. One of the things that I would like to alert you to before we begin the presentation is that I'm not going to tell you anything revolutionary, new, or different from what you already know. The purpose of my presentation is to share some stories and some thoughts that might stimulate your existing knowledge and resources, both to understand what I'm saying, but indeed to also cope and deal and strategize on how to create your own healthy and balanced life. So as you hear what I share, I encourage you to stay open and trust your unconscious mind to create the connection it requires to find the answers that you might have as we go along. So what is balance? Let's start with language. The word balance has an etymology from Latin, and it's bilanx, which means two dishes. And as the picture behind conjures, is the idea that a body is in equilibrium. Being in equilibrium, you're all scientists and physicists, so you know this better than I do, is when a body is immobile because the forces applied to it are met by equal forces in the opposite direction and the body doesn't move. What does this mean from a human point of view? Let me tell you the story of the peach tree. There was once upon a time a beautiful peach tree that was born in the perfect spot on the orchard. The best sunshine, the best irrigation, the best location to capture all of the rays necessary for the peach tree to grow and blossom. One day, the peach tree realizes that he's selling to the marketplace the best peaches the orchard has ever offered. But somehow, somewhere, he notices that the stall where pears are being sold is a lot more vibrant. There's a lot more activity. There's a lot more quote-unquote success. So he goes back to the orchard and he begins to observe the world and realizes that actually to be successful in life, one has to sell pears. And so he has a dilemma. And he asks himself, I'm making the best peaches the orchard has to offer. In fact, I've become so popular, they're the best peaches in the market. And yet it would appear to me that what the world favors and prefers is pears. What do I now do to become as successful as my fellow pear trees? So he comes up with a good idea. Every morning, I'm going to wake up early, pluck all of the peaches from my tree, go to the market, trade them in for pears, come back to the orchard, put the pears on the branches, and thereafter I'm going to be a pear tree. And so it goes for 20, 30, 40 years until now the most successful pear tree in the business realizes that somehow there's something missing. And it starts wondering, I don't understand this. I have done everything I have observed and have been asked in order to succeed in this world. And by all accounts, I have succeeded indeed. And yet I feel somewhat empty. I feel somewhat lost. I feel I have no meaning. I feel I've kind of lost my center. What might be happening? And one day, as he's thinking about this dilemma, his eyes fall on a further along the line tree, a peach tree nonetheless. And suddenly he realizes, oh, I used to be a peach tree myself. Might this be the reason why I'm not feeling so connected, so meaningful, so purposeful in the pursuit of life that have made me successful, but somewhat left me empty? And I want this to be a little bit of a metaphor for the life that many of us, dare I say, most of us find ourselves in. When we grow up, every single individual in this room, me included, has had a dilemma. I call it the attachment versus authenticity dilemma. And it's a choice that the baby has to make to either be themselves in their full glory, untainted, versus subscribing to the rules of an adult world they don't understand, where mom and dad might be stressed, might have lost someone important, might have money issues, there might be COVID, there might be a war, and therefore adapting who we are to a world that constantly wants us to restrict our capacity, that wants to send us in this direction instead of that. When we go to school, instead of telling us, my dear little boy, what is it you're talented in? Allow us to help you discover that and nurture it and bring it to life so that you can be of best service to the world. Instead, they tell us, we don't care necessarily about your natural talents. Here is math, here is English, here is science. Deliver well and we'll promote you. Don't deliver, sorry, you're not a good, acceptable member of this group. And so balance for human beings is when the innate essence, forgive me, of who we are is manifested in all of the roles that we then create into the world to go and be successful. And so if I am a therapist in alignment with my values and I espouse those values in my work, I feel alignment. If I am a partner and a lover in alignment with the values I have as to what partnership and relationships mean, I am in alignment, I feel balanced. But at some point, I also might experience a misalignment because perhaps the roles that I have been asked to comply with as per the rules of my family, my society, my religion, my state, my professional institution are not so particularly connected to who I am. And so I want you to hold in mind this for the rest of the presentation. This is the core concept. We get out of balance when our innate essence is of one kind, peaches, but the world has asked us and we complied with becoming a pear tree. Now, let's dive further into it. What happens when we lose the balance? And what I want to present is a model that I adapted from polyvagal theory. And it starts with the state in which we are in balance. So let's start with the positive news. When I am connected to who I am and the roles in the world are in alignment with it, I'm in a place of psychological safety and I feel engaged. Other types of things I am likely to experience is a sense of centeredness and groundedness and alignment and creativity, even excitement and motivation that is self-generated rather than motivated by external forces. However, for most of us, we actually experience stresses that come from the outside world. Sometimes we manufacture them from within, which brings us into a place that begins to feel dangerous from a psychological perspective. A couple of things to notice here. First, I want you to notice that the vertical here, all the way up to fight or flight response, it's still in the mindset of I can. And so all of the things that I'm likely to experience in this danger zone, which is anger, frustration, dysthymia is a low-level depression that remains over a long period of time without ever spanning into clinical depression, full clinical depression. So despite feeling all of this, I'm still in that mindset that says, but I can do something about it. I still have some degree of power to intervene and hopefully bring me back down to the green area. However, sometimes for some of us, stress begins to mount even further and I get into a freeze mode. Now, in psychological terms, here I am being threatened. My life is a threat. It might not be literally the case, but psychologically it feels that way. And one key characteristic of it is that I have now stepped into the world of I cannot. And so these are the types of people, for example, who experience clinical depression, who actively work in isolating themselves from the world and no longer invest time or energy to invest in relationships of any kind, professional or personal that might be. People who feel a great deal of shame, completely shut down, or walk about daily life with a sense of numbness. Nothing seems to excite me, but at the same time, guess what? Nothing seems to hurt me either. I'm in this flat zone where I can be functional, I can do the work I need to do, I can attend to the responsibility I have as a father, as a professional, as a whatever, but there's nothing happening in my experience of life. Now, the good news is that this is cyclical and it continues to change, in response to the level of stressors that we are exposed to in life, and to the strategies that we apply. And what I want to share later on are examples of strategies that you can use at every single level of this chart. And the other good news is that because it's cyclical, all of these responses can be activated, but if you intervene at the right time, with the right strategy, with the right people and support, they can also be deactivated and brought back to the green. Now, I see a lot of this happening in my clinic. And the question that emerged by working with a lot of people in this kind of journey is the following. How come I see people who are, by all intents and purposes, very successful? CEOs, businessmen, people who have created ventures of one kind or another, people who are genuinely healthy in terms of the way they look after their body, their family, their infrastructure. And despite being successful, strong, and healthy, they are so consistently experiencing and expressing a sense of feeling empty, demotivated, and sometimes outright depressed. And I realized that it had something to do with the interaction between the core essence and the outer world personas. And so I want to dive a little bit further into the dichotomy between the two, what they actually mean, and what interactions between the two actually create. So the inner self, which I call our essence, is at its most foundational and basic level, a combination of four bodies: our intellectual body, our spiritual body, our emotional body, and our physical body. I mentioned earlier, I was surprised by your poll responses because emotions seem to have a rank number 2 out of 3. Usually when I run that poll, thoughts win by far, followed by physical sensations. Emotions and feedback from others tend to score very low. The interaction between these four bodies, as uniquely coming together in the uniqueness of who you are, is what creates what I call essence. And it is from essence that are derived all of the blueprints, the potential, and the talents that God or nature, depending on who you believe in, has gifted us with. And it is from that blueprint and that potential that purpose, aspirations, dreams, and visions for life emerge. And as you already heard me say, many of us too often depart from the truths that exist within this sphere in favor of outside personas that the world has asked, but sometimes demanded that we actually manufacture. And so I realized that the interaction between that inner and outer world is actually creating a lose-lose mindset. And this is a very powerful experience psychologically because it creates one of the most gripping emotions, which is that of shame, especially when it becomes toxic. I'll speak about toxic shame in a second. Let me share a little bit more about the lose-lose mindset as I describe it. So we're already understanding that there are two types of world to contend with: an outer world with curated personas that we deem and design to be creating a sense of pleasure and a sense of achievement and a sense of comfort, but that we also create to give us validation. And please remember, these are the people who are sitting in the lose-lose mindset. Sadly, even though these personas are designed to make us feel good and give us validation, at some deep psychological level, we deem them to be fake or lucky. And sometimes, depending on our personality traits, if we are at the narcissistic end of the spectrum, we deem them to be grandiose and important. You might have heard the terms imposter syndrome. That's kind of where we are. It's the idea that the persona that I carry to the world doesn't align to who I am internally, and therefore I have this feeling of constantly being threatened by the possibility of being exposed and therefore found out for the fraud that I am. This external world contends with an inner self that very, very often for people in the lose-lose mindset is deemed to be intrinsically bad or deemed to be intrinsically wrong. And so we end up with an impossible dilemma once again, because the interaction between the two means that if I look at myself as viewed by the outside world, while I can intellectually acknowledge that I've achieved a lot, wow, I'm a military person, I did a TED talk, I blah, 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 I'm a professor, but actually, hold on a second, if they really saw the truth, this would be a disaster. And so I actually don't judge that positively enough to give me a sense of self-esteem that is balanced. And at the same time, I carry an inner sense of esteem that is deemed to be intrinsically, and the keyword is intrinsically, wrong or bad, and which means whichever way I look, I have nothing to anchor myself to develop a sense of esteem that is healthy. Let me give you a story of a couple of clients I've worked with. I'll kind of do it more quickly. Peter is 43 years old, and once again, for all intents and purposes, to the outside world, he made it. He's the chief operating officer of a very large organization, multi-millionaire, houses all over the world, private yacht, you name it. By the standard measures of societal success, he made it. He came to see me because he's feeling overwhelmed by life and feels that I don't know what to do next. I know I can retire now, but I'm scared that I'll die. What do I do next? And he keeps asking this question. I don't know what to do next. His inner speech is, I don't deserve love. I'm a bad person. I cannot trust myself. And he carries huge deals of shame and sadness. John, on the other hand, equally successful as an entrepreneur in this case, came to me because he's a serial perpetrator of infidelity, and he's sick and tired of this dual, duplicitous life. He wants a simpler life where he can make space for love and genuine human connection. But deep inside, he feels he's worthless, that he's not lovable, that he's not in control to shape any of this, and therefore carries a great deal of anxiety. And by all intents and purposes, he is depressed. He is also suicidal. So he's on a very tough journey. Now, if we analyze the two dimensions of these two people, the external world and the internal world, Peter externally sees all of these wonderful achievements and says, yeah, kind of good enough, I guess. And so does John, who looks at his end of the spectrum. And because John tends to sit in the narcissistic end of the spectrum, he looks at what he has achieved and says, I'm the greatest thing since the world discovered hot water or whatever. And therefore magnifies his presence, boastful to the world about who he is. So both these clients externally being clear at an intellectual level that what they did is of value, is of success, and somewhat judging it positively. However, when we look at their inner view of these achievements, we realize that Peter can see the achievements but minimizes them strongly. He values their impact, but he thinks he was just lucky. And ultimately, he believes he is a fake. And this is an emotional experience he has of these achievements. When you add to it the inner speech and his current emotional place, you get a picture that he's feeling quite heavy about life and nothing works. So he's in the lose-to-lose mindset that I shared earlier. And the same goes with John. John, in his narcissistic view of life, actually realizes that he cannot be himself. He feels so deeply ashamed about who he is that he has to boast and compensate as a measure to make up for who he believes he is internally. So you get the picture again of how these two realities ultimately create an interaction that develops toxic shame. Now, toxic shame is when you are walking around life with an inner narrative that says, no matter what you achieve, you are a failure, you're not good enough, you are not lovable, you're not acceptable to the world. And I want to alert you to the fact that no matter our biological age, we all carry two fundamental questions that we've had since we were little babies, and we're asking those questions from typically mom and dad or our main carers more broadly. And those questions are very simple. Am I lovable? Am I good enough? And when for some reason our inner self has been neglected, abused, or traumatized, and therefore we end up believing I am intrinsically bad or wrong, that often is why we overcompensate by stepping into our outer personas and we pump up the heat at maximum. And so you might find someone who becomes a workaholic because getting the rewards and the recognition from being good as a professional somewhat compensates, should make me feel better internally. Sadly, it never does, because the external personas are deemed to be fake. Because if the world only knew what I was really like inside, ha, ha, ha. And therefore, this toxic shame carries through everything we do, from dreaming during sleep, to the way we interact with the world, to the way we relate personally, sexually, intimately, professionally with others, even to the way we relate to ourselves. So how do we recreate the balance once we lose it because of life demands and expectations? Well, we need to turn a lose-lose mindset to a win-win mindset. And if indeed you recognize yourself in a lose-lose mindset, this is for you. If you find that you're already in a fairly balanced, happy place of life, this is not for you, because you're obviously not in the lose-lose mindset. Having said that, there might be areas of your life where you genuinely feel you're on top of the world and you are doing everything in a balanced way. So some of your essence is indeed being manifested in that domain. But it could also be that there are other areas where you know you're falling short. So this might also be for you. I'll leave that for you to decide. So from an inner self perspective, one of the core traits of toxic shame is that because it makes us believe we are intrinsically bad or wrong, it has therefore run away from the reality of what it means to be human. And what it means to be human is very simple. Equals, we have limitations. Equals, I am faulty. Equals, I am not omnipowerful. I am gifted with this, that, or the other talent and potential, but actually there's all the rest that doesn't necessarily align to who I am, and that's okay. And so from a psychological perspective, helping a client shift from seeing themselves as wholly bad and wrong to accepting that I'm faulty, I'm limited, but there are some things that I have access to that I am maximizing, is a good place to move them to. From a persona's perspective, this is one of the twists I don't see happening in psychology much. When we talk about low self-esteem, many of my colleagues and much of the literature still focus on developing a sense of healthy self-esteem from within. The problem is self-esteem from within is developed in partnership with the way we interact with the world. If I live in a cave and I have no interaction with others, I have no feedback mechanisms to let me know that this thing I do is great, this thing I do has potential, this one doesn't. I must exist within a system of other human beings in collaboration with, in order to get that feedback loop closed and let me know where my talent and potential and value is versus where my shortcomings might be. And so to realize that actually, when I am developing the persona of the therapist, the military person, the businessman, the professor, or whatever, those are not fake at all. They are a manifestation of who I am. I was the one who developed them. But because they are in opposition of who I feel I am, then they are deemed to be fake or not useful. And so helping a client shift that mindset to understand that, hey, you created this, they are the product of you, therefore at some level they are real. They are not wholly you, but they nevertheless are real. And finally, helping a client move from the shame that has become an identity to shame that has become what it is, a healthy emotion. Like anger, sadness, joy, happiness. Shame is a very useful emotion to have. It helps us signal what's happening in the world and what we need to do about it. The problem with toxic shame and low self-esteem is no longer just an experience I have, it becomes an identity. It's who I am. And when the brain, the conscious brain, tells the unconscious, I am bad, I am wrong, guess what? The unconscious ends up believing it. Because the unconscious mind, unlike your intellect, cannot distinguish between right or wrong, good or bad. It just believes whatever it's being told. And so when I walk around daily life telling myself, I'm bad, I'm bad, I'm bad, I'm bad, I'm bad, I'm bad, guess what? I am going to do everything in my power to make sure that I align with that belief. And therefore, people who are stepping into a win-win mindset end up with all of their curated persona now feeling designed to fulfill the potential and talents, no longer to please someone, but to connect to the essence I carry, that can become and feel real and useful, coupled with an inner self that feels limited but acceptable, and at the same time good enough, which therefore creates a win-win loop where the curated personas now are measured positively and the inner self is deemed good enough. Creating, therefore, you might have heard this word before, a feeling of equanimity, a balanced experience of life where I am able to interact with what happens to me right now fully, and then I can let it go, knowing that everything is transient and whatever happens next will be a new experience. Final couple of slides, and then we can open to the Q&A. So, what can you do at each level if you find yourself out of center, out of balance, out of equilibrium? Obviously, the strategy needs to change depending on whether you are in the green, yellow, or red zone. And the objective is written below the main theme. In the green zone is to maintain and grow. In the fight or flight zone is growing, learning, and healing. And in the freezing is to transforming and reanimate, resuscitate. In the green zone, to maintain, I can do a lot of different things. Remember, we're trying to do things in 4 bodies. So you will see activities here that refer to the body, to connectedness to something larger than us, to emotions, to intellect. And things like spending time in nature, spending time with loved ones, doing counseling, reading, informing yourself on the things that you are experiencing, healthy eating, healthy sleeping, all of the basics to maintain a balanced life. If you are in fight or flight mode and you're experiencing dysthymia, anxiety, resentment, anger, and you're not explaining where they come from or why they're impacting you or how you could deal with them, you could do things like this. Seminars like the one today, you could take therapy, you could do some retreats, connecting to loved ones, and many more things. And finally, for a freeze mode, there's a lot more intense experiences that you can create, starting with medication as well as intensive therapy, rehab centers if you're at the addictive end of the spectrum, and spiritual practice, also something that helps a lot because it gives us a sense of faith and connectedness. Now, in particular, I want to give you one example to take away, and it's aligned to the 4 bodies. And it's just a mental tool, and it links to Paul question number 3. Which of the symbols that you receive from your being, thoughts, emotions, physical sensations, and feedback from others, do you most use to keep healthy? And I want to use the analogy of the dashboard. Imagine driving around in your vehicle or using one of the equipment in this beautiful lab of yours, and there's no gauge. You don't know the pressure, you don't know the temperature, you don't know where the atoms are sitting, you don't know what they're doing, you don't know whether you have fuel in the car, you don't know whether your temperature in the engine is too high, you don't know any of that because the dashboard is gone. What would happen to the system? Well, at some point you might at least end up without petrol, or worst case scenario, your engine might blow up on you. You might hurt yourself, you might hurt somebody else. And so the question I often ask my clients is this: what is the dashboard that Mother Nature has equipped us with in order to keep check with where is my system at? What do I need to intervene on right now before I run out of fuel, I blow up, or whatever the case might be? And it goes without surprise that it's those 4 bodies. And so the truth here is that actually, when I said you already know, I also meant it like this. You are constantly, and I mean constantly, receiving input from all of your systems. Your psychology, your endocrinology, your immunology, your cardiovascular, your musculoskeletal system, constantly receiving stimuli that come back to the brain and say, hey, we have a tension in the neck, has been there for 3 weeks. What's going on here? Hey, the backache is painful now. Hey, these thoughts that you're having, this anger that you're feeling, this experience that you're now isolated from the world, whatever the case might be, your dashboard is constantly speaking. And I guarantee you, for most of you, your dashboard is like a Christmas tree, blinking like crazy, beeping and sounding alarms left, right, and center. And you're like, no, I gotta go to the meeting. Oh, I need to give Professor Neto the PhD session. Oh, I need to deliver this project. I cannot be looking at the dashboard, pay attention to it, and actually address what it's asking me to address. And that's why we end up in the yellow and the red zones. So my invite to you is that you begin to pay attention to the dashboard and you make sure that all of these 4 bodies are taken care of, because in the words very wise of Mike and the Mechanics, it's too late when we die to admit that we don't see eye to eye. And so please sit your inner self and your outer personas at the table, listen to what's on the dashboard, and have yourself become realigned with who you are. And in conclusion, please remember, it's human to lose balance. Nobody is immune to losing balance. And if you accept that and you realize that you are often overemphasizing academic achievement, personal pursuit, or whatever the case might be to compensate, you might want to remember instead paying attention to your dashboard so that you can intervene in that part of the system that at that very moment needs your attention. Thank you very much. Marilyn, could we swap back to the slide board so we can see the Q&A questions? So obviously I want to honor the fact that some of you are live in the room and you might have live questions. So I'll go to you first, and then depending on what happens in the room, we'll use what's on the board. Does anyone want to ask a question live? No, exactly what I was asking now. Please, you can ask in person.
I think being scientists, means that we always somewhere in between the yellow and the red. That's just because we are trying to do something nobody did before, and that's why it's the success rate is very low. And we constantly feel that something is going wrong. That make samples, 8% of them doesn't work. Like the behavior updating is not the one we would like to obtain, and so we constantly feel. I'm talking to myself,
Sure.
But I'm sure that the majority of people here feel the same way. And,
Okay.
my question is, if your career suggests you to be somewhere in this region, you're doing probably.
Okay, yeah.
How can you deal with that?
So for the people on Zoom, because I'm not sure your voice carries over here to the microphone, the gentleman in the audience asked, for us as scientists who are living life at the edge between the yellow and the red zone, given that our experiments, given that we are trying to do someone has never done before, and therefore our experiments often fail before we arrive at some answers and discoveries, what do we do? How do we balance ourselves knowing that our career is in that yellow-red zone? Would that be a fair summary? Okay, great. My answer to you is very simple, is to be careful to confuse what you do with who you are. And therefore, if you remember the green zone where I'm feeling engaged and safe, there was also an area that I talked about feeling grounded and creative. If you psychologically can remain centered to who you are, you can deal with life stressors, which are indeed the case as you described, and for many others in many other professions, from a completely different angle. So my short answer would be separate what you do, which is stressful and keeps you in orange and red zone, from who you are and how you show up to the experiment. And I'll give it to you in a practical sense. Imagine I'm testing on something, I have no idea what, and I have come into the experiment with a genuine scientific sense of curiosity, meaning I am not attached to the outcome. Obviously, it would be nice if the outcome is aligned to the hypothesis I'm testing, so I can publish a paper and become famous. But at the same time, if I'm being true to the scientific process, I come in with a sense of detachment, accepting that the data is going to tell me the truth. And if I interact with the data for what it is, I can then either prove or disprove what I wanted to test. The problem that we carry into work like this is that our attachment to an outcome keeps us psychologically in the yellow and red zone. And so once again, please separate what you do, which could indeed be in the yellow and red zone constantly, from who you are and how you show up to it. It would make a very big difference. Yes.
If I'm not mistaken, in yellow zone, the logo was fight/flight.
Sure.
What does flight mean?
It means to run away. So this is a very standard way of describing the physiological response that the human body has been conditioned to for millennia. So imagine we're all cave people and we're in the jungle and we're going out to hunt for the day. If there's a tiger, I have two options. In fact, I have three options. But in the yellow zone, it means, okay, I have a spear or I have friends that make me feel comfortable enough to fight the tiger. Okay, I'm going to take my chances and fight so I survive. If I'm on my own or if I don't have a weapon and I need to survive, which is our prime instinct, flight means run as fast as possible in the hope that the tiger doesn't catch you. Psychologically, is the same thing we do on most life stressors. Usually, depending on the situation and who we are from a personality point of view, our tendency to deal with stress can be that of moving towards or moving away from. And therefore, you might have situations that are in the yellow zone that are beginning to cause you stress, anxiety, anger, etc. And you're the type of person who confronts it face up and then just make sure that it stops and brings you back into the green. Or you might be the avoidant type, someone who steps away from the stressor in the hope that it just goes away. But the sad truth is that it goes away. You have to deal with it. Does that answer your question? All right, great. Yeah, you're welcome. Please.
Trying to expand on the
Yep.
Doesn't it sound like a good recipe for imposter syndrome? Because technically you detach yourself from your own results. You then also can at some point feel your detachment to your own success, right?
Let me qualify a little bit more. So the question from the gentleman was expanding on the first question, and it's about if you are suggesting that detachment is the answer, isn't that a good recipe to emphasize imposter syndrome? Because at some point, not only I'm detaching from the experiment, but I'm detaching from my experience of the experiment. So first of all, let me clarify that the word that I'm using, detaching or attaching, is a psychological process. It's not a distancing oneself from whatever, the relationship, the experiment, the work, the career, or whatever, which leads to I don't care. I'm detached in a nonchalant kind of way that means, well, whatever happens, who cares? No. Actually, being detached psychologically is linked to the idea of equanimity that I mentioned earlier. Raise your hand if you've ever seen the word equanimity and you know what it means. Nobody. Okay, great. So equanimity, which comes from Latin, equus, equal, and animos is the soul, the animals, the experience of our sense of self, means is to be in balance in life experiences. And I can give it to you in two extreme cases. Imagine I have a good year at work and the boss says, well done, Oberdan, this year was fantastic. Here's $100,000 bonus for the performance. You keep doing what you've done this year. Next year, you're gonna have even double. Hallelujah. Now, I attach myself psychologically to an outcome and I say, all right, great. Boss has promised this. Therefore, if I'm gonna work harder for the remainder of the year, I'm likely to guarantee the outcome that I want, and therefore I'll get the extra bonus. So here I am, I work extra hard the whole year, comes the end of the year, my performance review is top rating, and the boss says, thank you very much, Oberdan, your results were stellar, much better than last year, no bonus this year, because the market has changed, because COVID, because whatever, who cares, right? Suddenly, my experience of that interaction, because I was attached psychologically to the outcome, is a very negative one. Because I not only believed in the possibility of, but I believed I could control the outcome. And so what I mean as you step into the experiment is to accept that you, I, we are all limited because we're humans. And even the most intelligent of us, and there's clearly a great amount of intelligence in this room, you can never fight and win against Mother Nature. And so stepping into the experience, the experiment, the job, believing something, influencing as much as you can with all of your might, with all of your power, and yet detaching yourself from the outcome, knowing that nature will do its own thing and will tell you what it needs to tell you, is what creates that psychological distance that makes the experience more bearable, and I would argue more successful too. Let me go back to over here. All right, so the first one I clearly already answered. I'm going to, you have a question?
Yeah, I'm curious because you mentioned that a lot of people in leadership positions actually went through maybe a more or less unhealthy idea of how to perform well at their work. So how do you enable these people to revise their leadership style and the idea of success and work-life balance so that people who are employed by these can actually follow a different, more centered, more...
Can I summarize that and see if I got it correctly? So the question is around leadership, the fact that earlier I presented people who were in leadership positions and the struggles that they have with life. And the question you're asking is, how can they revise their leadership style in order to have a better experience of life, a better balance of life?
If all their achievement and productivity is based on having an unhealthy or a lifestyle that's centered around these red and these light and danger zones,
I understand.
How can they have confidence in a more balanced lifestyle achieving the same?
I'll give you two answers to that. The first one is this: often Actually, let's do it this way. Imagine we're all sailing. We're at sea, and we're going from A to B. We have our boats, our sails, our engines. We're doing our best to sail from A to B efficiently, and we realize that the leadership style, i.e. the tools and the mechanisms that we use to manage the boat and the process and the system are actually not optimal. And some leaders come to me and say, so how do I sail from A to B more effectively? How can I be a better leader so I have a more pleasant experience of life and have a more balanced view of the fact that at work I'm stressed like crazy, and then I have to go back home and live with my family, my kids, etc. And I believe that the large majority of the times, it's the wrong question to ask. Because often I find that when I speak to these individuals, it's not a matter at all as to how do I sail more efficiently. It's more a matter of realizing that actually I'm not a sea person at all. I should be on the mountains hiking with people who want to be in nature there on our feet. And so the question for them needs to become, how do I step into an environment that is actually aligned to the talent, skills, and tools I have so I can have a better life experience? There's a fun anecdote that I've heard a long time ago, and it's a beautiful way to depict how many of us lead life. So at the beginning of life, we are given a ladder, a very big ladder. And at some point, we take the ladder, we look for the wall, we put it on the wall, and we start climbing. And there's a point in life at which we've almost arrived at the top, and then we look at the wall and you go, damn, it was the wrong wall. And so we're looking for ways to be more efficient in the way we climb, and we wonder why our leadership isn't working, but actually it's because we're on the wrong wall. We should be on the mountains, not at sea. Now, for people, on the other hand, who genuinely are in the place where they need to be, so let's say they are at sea, and they want to be at sea, and they are designed to be at sea, but are struggling with their leadership style, then the conversation changes completely. You see, leadership is about three core components. Who am I and what's my message? Who is my audience and are they able, ready, and willing to become followers? And three, what are the tools and instruments I am using to communicate to that audience so that they can become followers and actually following me on my journey? And so in the case of the people who are in the right place, what I would investigate with them is, are you actually communicating your message clearly? Is your leadership not working because your people have no idea what you're actually asking them to do? Is it possible that your message is clear, but you don't have the tools and the means to communicate properly? An example, leaders who work internationally and have teams all over the world, cultural barriers can create great misunderstandings. And or finally, maybe there's nobody who wants to follow you. Maybe you are raving lyrical about, I don't know, French poetry, but you're in a club that loves metal music, heavy rock music, and they're not interested in French poetry. So the two answers are, let's make sure we're in the right environment. And two, when we are, let's make sure we are speaking the right language to the right people with the right tools. I hope that helps you. Okay, so Costa will fire you. Slides are not visible in the web. Oh, this is what's done already. Great. Struggle. When at work, I feel guilty because I do not spend time with my family. When at home, because I do not do work. This is so common. How to find peace within ourselves. Look, this is a social question, a philosophical question, a psychological question. I could spend 3 hours talking just about this particular item here. The best I can do in the minutes that I have available today is this. Approach it at the earthly transactional layer of analysis, okay? So the earthly transactional layer of analysis is the one that a camera could record, both audio and video, and we then project it on a screen, 20, 30, 40 people look at it and go, oh yeah, that's what happened, and everybody concurs. We all exist in the earthly transactional level of reality, whatever reality we've constructed for ourselves. And in this world, there's a lot we can do to learn more effective and efficient time management techniques that can help with the sense of guilt that derives from basically what this person is saying. never being good enough. Because if I'm here, I'm shortchanging there. If I'm here, I'm shortchanging there. And guess what? No matter where you are, you're always shortchanging this. So you're still at some level managing too many plates in the air. And my answer to that, simplistic as it might be, is do an audit of your daily life, tackle it first at an earthly transactional level with very simple, practical time management techniques to make peace with the fact that you've only got 24 hours like everybody else. And if you are being fair in the share that you are giving to the various pillars of your life, family, self, health, work, whatever you, hopefully you should see guilt diminishing. If it doesn't, come see me. No time with kid. Every day it's just work, chase kid to school, fetch from school and chase kid to sleep. I think it's very much similar to the top. But there's something else important to say here too, which is there are indeed phases in our life where a pillar must take precedence. So we have the 4 pillars of the self, but the self also exists in an external world. So let's say I have just had a new baby. It goes without saying that my sleep is going to suffer and I'm going to have to make efforts in this pillar of life, perhaps at the expense of other pillars in life. But if you remember what I said earlier, which is everything is transient, everything constantly changes, and you accept the fluctuations of life experience with equanimity, you might find that you are better equipped to deal with those fluctuations. And the other thing that absolutely is necessary, remember, you are never alone. In the example of just having a baby, I'm assuming I have a partner. I can share my struggles with my partner. We can collaborate. There is strength in unity. If I don't have a partner, hopefully you have a healthy circle of friends. If you don't, build one now. And if you don't have that either, come to see me again. My advisor does not seem to care about me and I feel left over. What can I do? Okay, that's an interesting question and indeed a very pertinent one. First of all, I would say act with compassion. First, before yourself, oh, sorry, I'm tapping on the microphone, sorry about that, and your advisor. Remember, they are human too. They are struggling with meeting their priorities to their bosses, to their kids, to their family, to their, I don't know, dermatologist, oncologist, you name it. And so act with compassion for them and for yourself. But the second thing, and this is a very practical tip, always feel free to share your viewpoint. Now, you need to learn about the context. You need to learn about a skillful way of doing it. And I do accept that there are situations in which it is not advisable to be transparent with your needs and your feelings, because let's say for argument's sake, your advisor is a narcissistic megalomaniac who takes any form of feedback as a personal to their own. I see some faces smirking, meaning, yeah, my advisor is exactly that. We should send him to you too. Narcissistic megalomaniac, it is probably unlikely that they would receive your kind, respectful, and yet assertive feedback with any degree of openness and flexibility. And they might actually use it to turn it around and make your life even more miserable. But wanting to believe that most of us have a heart somewhere, if you feel there is a chance that your advisor might receive your questions and your feedback, that you're feeling left out, you're not feeling cared for, you're not feeling guided, you're not feeling supported in your PhD pursuits or whatever advisory you're seeking, then go for it. Find a way to construct your message skillfully and present it in the most compassionate way as you can. I hope that answers your question. How long do we have left? Do I need to be conscious of time? Okay, great. We'll see how many questions we can take in 4 more minutes. So, how to create meaningful connections and true friendship in adult life? The answer I'm going to give you sounds a little bit counterintuitive, but it begins with you. If you do not have a meaningful connection with yourself, you cannot build meaningful relationships with others. I'll give you an example. Let us imagine you have never, ever, ever seen the color green. You've never seen it written anywhere. You've never seen it. You don't know what green is. And then you meet someone that says, hey, for us to be in a good, strong, healthy, intimate relationship, I need some green in my life. How the hell are you going to give them green if you've never seen green? So if you haven't, again, tapping on the microphone, if you haven't seen, felt, experienced a deep sense of meaning with yourself, and I'm talking about that dichotomy between the external self and the internal self, and you embrace that marriage with equanimity in that win-win mindset I spoke of, you are hard-pressed to make meaningful connections with others. Yes, sure, you can make healthy connections that perhaps remain at this level, but if you want it to go deep, where you're creating intimacy, where you're creating a genuine connection that is spiritual and emotional and sexual and intellectual and physical in nature, you must first build that with yourself. And I'll probably take one more and then we stop. So my physical health is poor. I'm sorry about that. And team doesn't give enough support to take care, such as to cover duties during medical leave. How to find psychological balance? Ask, 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 and ask again. If your health is as poor as you describe, needing what sounds to be regular medical leave and care, and you need special adjustments made in your work environment, or indeed in your work duties with your team, reach out to the people in your team who have the power. Reach out to the leadership team in the unit where you work. If your circumstances are special and you need that support, you need to ask. You might be told, sorry, cannot help you. In which case, it's still up to you to decide what you want to do with a work environment that doesn't accommodate your needs if they are fair and reasonable. But ask, 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 and keep asking until you get the answers. And if it's a yes, great. If it's a no, well, you know where you stand. If it's a maybe, ask again. And I think I'll stop there. Otherwise, I could continue forever.
Thank you so much for today.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Antonio. Thank you.
Thank you. Everyone, thank you so much for coming. I hope you enjoyed as much as I did. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Have a great day.
I'll be around if you want to ask me some more questions. Thank you.